Happy evening, everyone.
Evening, ma'am.
With the skepticism looming large during these trying times, we bring to you a platform to ask, listen, share, and receive valuable thoughts and advice from the people whom we are banking on to put life back on track and help us resume a normal life. So we have with you our doctor parent community of RACS Palikudam, and a very warm welcome, and we salute the commendable work that you all have been putting in during these trying times. I would like to introduce you all to the team, and we have Dr. Ramani, pediatrician from Ganga Hospital, who has been working with the other parent, or Dr. Ram from Ganga Hospital, to make sure that our parents and her children have been attended to during these trying times and during the emergencies, to make sure that the oxygen beds are available to them. Happy evening, Dr. Ramani. And we have Dr. Lavanya, a pediatrician, a parent who has been with us at RACS for the last for 4-5 years. We have Dr. Pratula Shivakumar, ENT surgeon. We have Dr. Sharnita, psychiatrist. We have Dr. Mohan Siddharth. We have Dr. Bimla from Ganga. We have Dr. Shifa, preventive pediatric dentist, Dr. Shubha, a speech therapist, and Dr. Sharmila. So welcome on board, doctors. And the moderator for this evening is our very own Tejas Kanda, a Rackster, who wants to take up medicine and is a medical intern at the Ganga hospitals. So over to you, Tejas.
Happy evening to all the doctors present here. I would like to start off with some basic questions regarding COVID-19. So you can answer based on your area of expertise. So what are some of the symptoms of
Could you just
COVID-19?
make it a little louder, please?
So what are some of the symptoms of COVID-19 in children?
Check.
We put the question to Dr. Lavanya.
In pediatrics, actually, in children, we categorize them into three, like mild, moderate, and severe. Usually, the mild symptoms, they'll develop a low-grade fever, maybe lasting for 2 to 3 days, with some mild cold, running nose, cough, and maybe sometimes they might have some GI manifestations like vomiting, diarrhea, mild abdominal pain. This mild COVID, maybe they might be asymptomatic also. Maybe one of their parents might be symptomatic. And coming mild COVID children generally can be managed by home isolation. Next, coming to moderate, usually in mild COVID, we have to monitor them. We have to advise them with only with paracetamol and monitor their heart rate and maintain check saturations maybe every 8 hours once at home if they are going to go for home isolation. Usually it will be like a mild viral illness, mild influenza-like illness, which can be appropriately like managed at home if they have a good caretaker, if one of their parents are not or asymptomatic and COVID negative. Even if COVID positive also, if they are fine, they can take care of the child. It can be home isolation itself for mild COVID. For moderate, Dr. Ramani, you want to take?
Oh, please go on, ma'am. Go on.
Mild to moderate, usually they can have symptoms can be increasing in nature, fever lasting for more than 4 days, with cough is increasing in nature. Usually we tell the parents to monitor their saturation and breathing rate. They might have some mild chest indrawing, some chest retractions, which they usually see in children with wheeze. We tell them there is age-appropriate respiratory rates. We tell them to monitor the respiratory and saturation, and mainly the urine output, how they are doing in between fevers. Any deterioration, like when they are afebrile, in between afebrile period, during afebrile period also, they are looking sick, more tired, urine output is coming down, any bluish discoloration of the peripheries, and the intake is less, and looking more tired and sick. Generally, we recommend, and saturation is also not maintaining 94, less than 94 in room air, or 90 to 93 at room air. Generally, these children are, we refer them for admission to a COVID care hospital. And coming to the severe, usually the respiratory rate is generally, even in moderate COVID-19 cases also, they can develop pneumonia-like, mild pneumonia-like symptoms. But once they are more, like retractions are more sinus, there is more bluish discoloration, the intake is very less, more toxic they are looking. They'll transfer into the tertiary care, like tertiary care unit they might require. They'll land up in severe pneumonias. severe pneumonia or severe COVID-19, usually the manifestation will be pneumonia, severe pneumonia, presenting with severe respiratory distress, with not maintaining, requiring oxygen. They might be oxygen dependent, and they can have other complication also. Like they might develop.
Doctor, just to, sorry to interrupt.
Yeah.
So basically going to on, for a parent, they really don't know when the child has been infected with COVID. Right? We do hear parents coming back and telling us, we have been very careful. We don't have a stranger coming in. Our children have been totally isolated for the last 3 or 4 months without people coming in and going out. So they really don't know that the child is suffering from symptoms unless, you know, the older people show signs and they test themselves. So Dr. Ramani, a question back to you. When do you think a child should be tested for COVID for a parent to be, you know, to create an awareness that my child has been infected with COVID? And what should be the next step? Because parents, one is, as soon as they know the child has been infected, they kind of panic. They are on a panic mode. Children become very anxious, and that can lead to severity, is my belief as a person being with children. What is your take, and what would you advise parents?
Ma'am, this is a pandemic situation. In this pandemic situation, each and everything can be attributed to COVID. Whether you have a fever, body pain, feeling tired, lethargy, mild running nose, it's nothing to do with the climate or nothing to do with the food, what you took and all. Consider each and everything is related to COVID. When you suspect COVID, it's always mild. When we diagnose COVID, it's a severe. That's the thing. That's what we are practicing. See, whenever a child having a mild temperature, which is more than 100.4, suspect COVID. If the fever prolongs for more than 48 hours, do testing, because if you diagnose it early, you can avoid the transmission to the people who are at home, maybe elders. So consider each and everything as a COVID. Test with if the fever goes beyond 48 hours. If it is present with respiratory symptoms like cold and cough, do testing by around 3rd day. Between 3rd to 5 days, if you diagnose COVID, the chances of recovery is good, and the chances of transmission also very weak. So, there is no if and but and all. Do testing if you have fever. That's all.
Thank you, doctor. So do you advise a swab test or a blood test?
Swab test, RT-PCR.
Ms. Dr. Lavanya?
Yeah, yeah.
A swab test is better for children?
Yes, ma'am. We go for swab test.
Okay, so in the given situation, a child has been tested for COVID and it's been positive, what is the next step? Because parents think immediate admission, is immediate admission required, or do you base it on the parameters?
Luckily, the symptoms in children are all either asymptomatic or it is only mild symptoms. If you have the symptoms and you diagnose before 5 days, assess the child. If the child having a fever beyond more than 5 days, probably he might require admission. Or he presents with severe cough and breathing difficulty and saturations like pulse oximeter oxygen level is less than 94, or child already have some comorbidities like a liver disease or heart disease or lung problem or severe asthmatic problems, it's always better to keep in the hospital. But there is only fever which lasts for a couple of days, mild running nose. Otherwise, child is very active and eating well and causing urine and all. It's really good. And it's better always monitor him at home itself. Home is the safest place for the children, provided he's asymptomatic. Hospital is the better place if the child having symptoms beyond 5 days. So
we
no need
also
to
hear, yeah, sorry. We also hear that the blood clotting is one of the aftermath of COVID. For older people, there is a lot of blood clotting and they do a particular test with a blood test to check if the blood clotting is on a higher side. Does the same thing imply for a child? Or should there be any post-care after COVID that parents have to look into?
No, Indian Academy of Pediatrics gave us a clear guidelines. In that guideline, the child who having a severe disease, who presents with fever, severe breathing difficulty, their saturation level is very low, who requires oxygen, ventilator and all, they might require this blood clotting things and all like D-dimer and etc. They require anticoagulants and all. But not generally, 90% of the children didn't require any blood investigations for COVID per se. So we no need to worry about those things, which is exclusive for adults.
You want to take it over from here?
Either of the parent, either mother or father or any other family member who is staying in the house is tested positive, the child should not be moved unless and until for 48 hours till the child's report comes. Usually what parents do is if they are positive, they send the child to the grandparents' house. So this should not be done. This should not be encouraged. Unless the report comes, child will anyway will be asymptomatic, child will be anyway COVID positive. They think one day just 2 hours of fever, I got fever, I might be COVID positive, and the mother sends the child to the grandparents' house. This should not be encouraged. The child should stay with them in home isolation.
This is something that we noticed. This is something that we noticed, that we had a mother calling us and saying, I have tested positive. I have 2 of my children, or smaller children in the primary grades. I have sent them to my parents' house because I've self-isolated myself. My next question was, why would you send them to your parents' house and infect your elderly parents as well, right? So you advise them to keep the children back with them?
Yes, ma'am. They should have any other caretaker at home can take care of the child. Mother can be in isolation in another room, and the child can be in another room with the mask. They can handle the child with a mask. So the child should not be sent to the grandparents' house.
Dr. Pratula, back to you. What would you say the do's and don'ts of treatment during COVID is to the parents? Parents with small children, I'm sure you also have, you're a parent of 2 small children, and you know the difficulties parents do face with having children around. So what would you say the do's and don'ts are to the parent community?
Yeah, so I think, ma'am, by now, like all of us know, like wearing a mask, social distancing and all this, and I'm sure everybody is following it. But there are these very small points where we get careless upon. So those might be like, one, according to the recommendation now, the Disease Control Center is announced for double masking. So it is best that when parents step out, like even to a grocery store, or you go to a hospital visit for a general checkup, or even for the child's vaccination, it's best that they wear double mask. I'm talking about the parents, the double masking. And for the kids wearing masks, it's recommended that children aged 3 years or 2 years and above can safely wear a mask for a short period of time. And for the parents, for the double masking, so what is the right double masking? So basically, you create a complete seal around the nose and the mouth area. So for this, the best thing that you can do is wear a blue color mask, that is a surgical mask that can be worn as a first layer. And to top it off, you can wear a good quality 3-layered fabric mask. So this is the right way to do a double masking. And in case you're doing having an N95 mask, then there's no need for a double mask. But wearing 2 surgical masks or wearing 2 fabric masks is not the right way to do double masking. So when you're stepping up, the perfect way to do a double mask is to wear a surgical mask, and on top of it, to wear a fabric mask. So that's one. And the second thing, what I was talking about, the small carelessness that happens, is that we are careful in most of the times around us. So whenever you ask, like you were saying, they keep saying, ma'am, we never stepped out, we never go out, but we got infected. So how is this happening? Because I think we kind of, lower our guards when we meet our family, our neighbors, especially family from another household. So it's the weekend, we tend to visit our parents. Since most of us live in nuclear families, we tend to visit our parents and grandparents in different houses. And now the rate of transmission happens like that, and that's why the rate is so high. So even if you're meeting up with a family from a different household, it's best that even the children and the adults continue to wear a mask and follow social distancing even then. And especially all of us living in gated communities and apartments, we again tend to become careless in these areas. So you can avoid sending children to your friend's house to play, avoid inviting other kids to play along with your kids, because that's like the routine when we live together in a community. But now safety is a must. And I know it's like very, very difficult keeping our kids engaged at home, especially in an apartment setup, but safety is first. So we have to like kind of keep them entertained inside our houses. And even when you meet your neighbors, it's best that you wear a mask. And in case you have maids or helpers who come into your house every day to help you, it's best that they do double masking, wear a gloves, and for added protection, if they're helping out you in the kitchen, it's best they wear a shield as well. So this is going to give added protection. I feel these are the small areas that we tend to be careless about, and I like to insist upon these points, ma'am.
Excuse me, ma'am. I just like to add as 2 points. Though as an adult, we go out often because I want to buy this thing in a grocery shop. The lockdown is coming up. I want to pile up things. So we go out, we get exposed. Just because our immune system is good, we don't catch infection. We come back and sometimes we tend to be very careless. We don't wash all those things. We come directly walk into we keep our mask on the dining table. We touch everything. These kids who are a bit not immune like us, they tend to catch up the infection very easily. And one more thing, we let a maid inside, a maid who's going and coming every day, because we don't know to whom she's getting exposed. And she comes and walks in, she does all the kitchen activities. When we are a working parent, the kid is most of the time with the maid. She gives the same cell phone to the child to watch some videos while feeding the child. So this is two important areas which we have to be very careful.
Doctor Teju?
Yes, so I have a question which I would like to address to Dr. Ramani. So this is about the black and white fungus, which is now being considered as an epidemic as ordered by the High Court. So does this affect children in general or all COVID patients?
As Dr. Ramani is not available, can we?
Hello.
Yeah, doctor.
Hello. Hello.
Yes, doctor.
Am I audible?
There you are.
Hello.
Yes, doctor, you are.
Yeah, this black fungus things and all, it's mainly the elderly people who are having a comorbid conditions like cancer, malignancy, chronic diabetes and all, who require prolonged oxygenation therapy for more than 2 weeks and steroids for more than 2 weeks. Some patients who have a severe COVID pneumonia who depends oxygen for prolonged duration, along with the comorbidity patient, they used to develop this kind of problems. This mucormycosis. The problem with the thing is it affects the vision, and right now we don't have enough stock of the medicines called liposomal amphotericin. So for that reasons, we need to diagnose COVID very early and start treatment very early. If you diagnose very early the COVID condition, even we can avoid these comorbidities also, which is highly preventable.
Thank you, doctor. So I would like to ask a question regarding the mental health effect that COVID has on children and adults alike. So what effect does COVID have on mental health, and how can this aspect of this effect be addressed?
Teju, I'd like to interrupt here. The problem now, what we see is it's visible. The COVID is quite visible in terms of the pandemic, but the invisible would be the aftermath of what the pandemic leaves the children behind in terms of the mental and emotional well-being, and also the anxieties in children. So that would be visible in maybe a year to come, and especially when children are in the development stages of 1 year to the first 5 years or the first 10 years, they have been raised in an environment where it's quite toxic, with a lot of uncertainties, with a lot of anxieties. So children shouldn't think that this is the norm. And what does this leave behind on the mental well-being of children post-pandemic? Because this is invisible right now, and we would see the damage done in children maybe a year or two later. So who would like to take this question on what is the aftermath, and how are we going as parents going to make sure that children are not affected by the invisible damage right now?
Ma'am, the scenario we see now is 24/7, the children are confined inside the house. We are not finding any way to indulge them in any outdoor or group activities. So what happens here? They are not able to channelize their energy properly. So that leads to all sort of emotional problems. Currently in this situation, they get frustrated easily, they start showing temper tantrums, they don't listen to us, whatever we are telling them. They don't eat their meal properly, and screen time has been increased. Why all this? Because in early in school, they used to play in sand, they used to play in water, they used to play with all other kids. The two important senses, which most of you are aware, are the proprioceptive and vestibular senses that get stimulated by the outside environment. Currently, that is not happening. That's the problem where the child faces so many emotional issues. So first thing, we have to be honest with the child and explain them what is the scenario going on instead of giving them any fake news or something. So and one more important thing is we are the model. So the children learn from us. So if we are very anxious, if we are seeing the news channels 24/7, we are having this panic and very anxious about the current situation, the child is also gonna mirror the same thing. So first we have to handle it in a balance. So how we watch the news, how we take it, how we are managing our stress, how we are channelizing our energy. So that is how the child is going to learn.
Thank you, Doctor. We have Dr. Shubha with us. Dr. Shubha deals with, the remedial children who need extra support with the academics and with also the behavioral issues. So, Dr. Shubha, when we focus a lot on children on the whole, and we do say that children need the extensive support and the remedial support on a normal day, and these children during these times, if I would say, have been neglected, don't receive the proper guidance over an autism support or whatever. So what does it take for these children, and what should the course of action be for parents who have children, with a learning disability, or a child who needs sensory disorder, or anything it could go? What would your advice be to these parents?
Ma'am, like you said, yes, they are completely neglected, and they really don't have access to day-to-day therapies that they've been receiving. For the past 1 year, they've been receiving very less amount of therapy comparatively. So a lot of kids who have improved are also deteriorating a little bit. When it's so difficult to handle kids without any disabilities, it is more difficult to handle kids with disabilities. The parents are put through a lot of pressure and stress right now, because they are not, though they know and aware that they should be giving a lot of therapies to these kids, but they are not able to give it because the scenario right now is not allowing. Not many kids are comfortable in front of the screen. I have tried in person a lot of therapies on screen, but it is not really working. The parents will have to be completely with the child, and they don't really listen to the parents, and a lot of meltdowns happen and things like that. So something that I am doing right now is training parents to give the therapy that we've been doing. Like there are a lot of parent training programs that have come up for these kids, especially training programs where it is happening collaboratively, instead of just attending a training program for speech or training program for occupational therapy. Instead of doing that, if they have a collaborative program and if they get to attend those collaborative programs, it is benefiting a child in a lot better manner. And also what I tell the parents now is, don't have any restrictions at home. I know you don't have a maid, I know you cannot keep cleaning your house, but the sensory input matters a lot. Even for kids without special needs, if those sensory inputs are given at least in a moderate amount, it's much easier to regulate them for the day-to-day life. So the sensory input for a kid with the special needs is much higher. If they want to jump around, you need to provide a safe space at home to really jump around so that they can calm themselves down. You cannot tell, don't jump. There is someone below living in our house. Don't do this, don't do this. Throughout the day, when they keep hearing this, it is not very comfortable. So it is very important for parents to give that sensory input to the child. That is something I have been advising one. The second thing is those parent training programs where they get a collaborative input from all the specialists, like a speech therapist, occupational therapist, and a psychiatrist and a special educator to help these kids. More than if it is a lower kindergarten or upper kindergarten level, or even the pre-KG, I usually tell them more than academics, it's very important to get them into the fine motor skills, gross motor skills, and pre-writing skills instead of sitting and forcing a child to, start writing right away. So this is exactly what I've been telling parents. They are taking it, but it's not coming straight away.
Yeah, exactly. Yep. Because we also see that, especially being the development stages, these are the stages where we see that children need to be worked upon, and I'm sure parents also have been caught up with their own issues back home, with their own uncertainties. But I see that these children have to be given an extra attention and care at home. So that's a need for the question. Thank you, Dr. Shubha. Teju?
So I would like to direct the next question to Dr. Ashok. So I would like to know about the current vaccine situation for 12 to 18-year-olds.
Dr. Ashok, since we see him available here, would you like to take the question, Doctor?
Yeah, hi. Sorry, I was a little unwell, so I was not able to come on video. Thank you. First, I'd like to share my feedback about the COVID, because I'm a COVID survivor right now. Because me, Shweta, my kids, all of them had COVID last week. So we're just coming out of it. And it's need not to be panic. Overall, I feel stage by stage, if we can assess and make sure that we are hydrated properly, and go and take hospital help whenever it is needed, I think that is the best solution where we can fight COVID easily. Because my kids, first my little one got fever for a day, then 2 days later I developed symptoms, my wife developed symptoms of sore throat. So first week was fairly okay, second week I developed fever. So but everything went well with symptomatic support, multivitamins, and support to care. Thank God that everyone is doing good. And to the question what sir was asking, why vaccination, for now the government has only asked to vaccine after 18 years. So related to whether it's Covishield or Covaxin. So but I think in practical grounds, maybe suggestions are welcome. There is very less availability of vaccines. So only after 40 years people are getting clearly vaccinated. After 18 years, it is very difficult for someone to get a vaccine. For current situation, probably in days to come, and new vaccines coming up in this month end, we'll have shortcomings of it. I would suggest, yes, vaccination is a must. Because I was vaccinated 2 months before with my second dose, I was able to fight my COVID very well, easily. Otherwise, I know my friends who had very tough time, my colleagues, my friends who are doctors, orthopedicians, few of them gynecologists, got into ICU, got sick. I actually lost a friend of mine who is an orthopedician because he was not vaccinated, and he was exposed to a heavy viral load. So I would suggest vaccination is a must. And if there's an opportunity for anyone after 18 years to get a vaccine, I would definitely recommend to get vaccinated as early as possible.
I would like to direct the next question to Mr. Shifa, Dr. Shifa. So you are a pediatric dentist. What advice would you give to parents, and how important is dental hygiene during this time?
Shifa, you need to unmute.
Hi, good evening. So we've been speaking about the disease, the occurrence of disease, and what kind of vaccination, how the disease takes over, a lot of aspects. But the most neglected aspect is prevention. And the moment we talk about prevention, we always think about, sanitizer, or, social distancing or masking yourself. And but the first line of prevention for any disease starts from the body. So this being a disease that's mainly because of droplets, and it's a disease that is actually passing through the oronasal passage, and that's where the viral load enters, and it's locking in there, and it's multiplying, and that's how it gets into the body. So one of the major thing that we miss out here is the preventive aspects of what is the day-to-day oronasal hygiene that children can follow to prevent this. The first ever thing would be how we breathe. So now when we were talking about a lot of gadget involvement now, there are not a lot of mindfulness issues that children are having now. The aspect of mindful eating or mindful breathing is not there. If you actually ask children about how they are breathing, it is a natural phenomenon and they're not aware. So an open mouth posture is very, very common to see now. So when I say open mouth posture, when the lips are not together, it's open. And it's the recent data says about 80 to 90% of the children have these issues of open mouth posture. So now going back to the mechanism, the defense mechanism of a body, mouth is to eat and nose is to breathe. The nose is made of specialized cells. You know, it has natural filters, and there are humidification process that happens in the nose, whereas mouth doesn't. So what we actually think is, even if the mouth is open, it's the nose that is breathing. But you cannot actually properly do a nasal breathing if there is an open mouth posture, or when the lips are not sealed and when the mouth is open. And this kind of puts the children at a risk of not taking advantage of the natural filter mechanism. So if most of you who are following the news, there are different aspects and the different lines of treatment of COVID. So when you look at the SARS and COVID kind of virus, one of the most well-known treatment is nitric oxide. So we all know about oxygen and carbon dioxide. There's something called as nitric oxide, and our body has a natural mechanism to secrete this nitric oxide if we breathe through our nose. So the nose lining, the sinus cavity helps, coats it with nitric oxide, and this nitric oxide is said to have antiviral capacity. So it's like a first line of defense. And when you encourage children to breathe through their nose, it will be a primary aspect for prevention, wherein you're helping the body take the advantage. Having said this, most of the children will be able to do this when you teach them mindful breathing. But some children who have issues with their adenoids or tonsils, if there is a blockage, if the nasal passage is not good, who have weak musculature, and who have craniofacial issues, like with the jaws are small or narrow, they will not be able to. That is when they need expert guidance. But predominantly, mindful breathing would be like a first stage of prevention for a lot of children, wherein you can take advantage of nitric oxide. And what other habit of prevention you can add on is gargling, the mouth gargles. So there's a lot of data that says that, maintaining oral hygiene can actually prevent even the black fungus, though it's not very common with children. So having a good oral hygiene, using mouth rinse, especially the povidone iodine solution, it is by research shown to neutralize the virus. So we use this because we work with high viral load. As pediatric dentists and dentists, we work close to the mouth, and we make the patients rinse their mouth with povidone iodine for about 2 minutes to bring down so there's a lot of data that says that, if you are exposed to a viral load, but if you're having a clean hygiene, maintenance, this can help you. If you're regularly rinsing or gargling with the povidone iodine, so this can help you prevention. But the first line of prevention starts from healthy breathing. And in case you've developed flu-like symptoms, usually ideally changing the toothbrush once in 3 months is highly recommended, because we know this toothbrush harbors these organisms. But in case you recently recovered a disease, it's better you change. And we being nuclear family, we have a habit of all of a toothbrush, kept close together. These are the little things where we miss out. So the toothbrushes of the entire families are kept close together, and one of them is being diagnosed with the disease, and we're wondering how we pass it. It's simple mechanism of making sure you don't use the same toothbrush. You change the toothbrush in case any of them in the home has had symptoms, and having the toothbrush away from each other's toothbrush and covering it. So these are something very important. So simple things.
Thank you, doctor. That's quite informative with the toothbrush, especially, which skips our mind, when there is a person who's been infected in the family. Yeah, thank you so much. So now back to Dr. Sharmila. Dr. Sharmila, what would you tell parents when the oximeter seems to be people seem to be hooked onto the oximeter these days, where they panic when the readings are not. So what is the safe zone of the reading that goes on, and which should be, when should it be an area of concern, and how should they basically monitor, like when it comes to a child or when it comes to the parent?
What we are seeing currently is mass panic. Basically, just mass panic rather than coding drugs. During the first wave, when I was in a pharmacy, I was seeing a lot of people trying to get over-the-counter HCQs. Now they are going behind remdesivir. Remdesivir is only needed in ICUs, but they're trying to get in contact with pharmacy people and trying to get the drug for themselves, even before testing positive. So first would be when you have fever or cough or body pain, until proved otherwise in a current situation, most probably you have COVID. So the disadvantages of delayed testing is, once you have fever, that means your body has started to produce antibodies against COVID. That's when the cytokine storm starts. That means your body is about to give up. Most probably 80% of the people who test positive for COVID do recover. But the other 10 to 20% who do not recover from high fever or go on to develop deep cough, or they tend to worse very fast. So that's when we,
according to you, sorry to interrupt, so what would your range be? Like they say 97 to 98, you're quite fit, and then your area of concern is a drop from 90, if I'm right? For parents, what should be?
I think we should rather go by the symptoms than to depend on the pulse oximeter, especially when you are trying to monitor yourself at home. I think that should be left to the doctors who are trained to do it.
Maybe we should put this question to Dr. Ashok now, because I'm sure as a parent and having two children next to him, he would have. So Dr. Ashok, going back to you, how many times do you think you have used the oximeter, and have you used the oximeter, to gauge your saturation levels, or have you not used the oximeter?
Yeah, definitely. That was the best tool that I had with me. Obviously, I'll go by it. I used at least. The saturation levels, it was at least 97 plus. So any value above 97, 98, you can be really confident that, okay, things are okay. Other thing I want to highlight is, sometimes if you don't use standard pulse oximeters, or if you don't use pulse oximeters which has got a graphical wave pattern, that has got a small graphical pattern, so you might tend to err on the, you might edge on the wrong results, because even for me, sometimes it shows 80, 85. Probably I didn't fix it properly, or the sensor was not rightly on the nail bed. So I would suggest application of the pulse oximeter in the right way. Confirm it by the graphical wave that is going. Just leave it for 30 to 45 seconds before we confirm our saturation. People get very reflex. You put the pulse ox, in other first 10 seconds, what saturation comes, we believe that is our saturation. No. Please wait for 30 to 45 seconds until it senses properly, comes a proper graphical record, then you will notice your pulse saturations properly. The other myth is that if you have nail polish, or if you have mehendi or something applied, mardani, whatever you applied in your nails, that might wrongly reflect your pulse oximeter values. So I would suggest, please clean the nail bed properly. It should be clean without any chemical interface, because that's how the technology of pulse oximeter works. So saturation, to answer the question, any value of 97, 96, 97 plus is very good. We can be confident. Any value that goes less than 94 is to be concerned, especially for adults or people elderly above 60s, less than 94, who are not having any wheezing or not having any COPD background. It is to be definitely of importance that you should take a note there. And hospitalization is definitely advisable. For kids, 97, 98 plus is very good. So because as I was even listening to the other talks earlier, one thing is, kids usually, they don't behave the same way like what adults go through in terms of pneumonia, And as you asked, no, ma'am, like kind of pulmonary congestion in terms of high D dimers causing blood coagulation issues. So kids don't go through that. So for them, maximum what can happen is only what we call MIS. So it's an inflammatory syndrome. So there, kids developing pneumonia is kind of very rare. So here in this wave, kids are affected more. Most symptoms will be cough, cold, fever, coryza, myalgia, and few of them may develop pneumonia, either probably from COVID alone or secondary bacterial infection. So I would suggest saturation is an excellent tool if applied properly and monitored in sequence and taken with the guidance of a doctor. It will be a really good tool. And overdoing with the pulse ox among ourselves, treating conditions that is far apart from our confidence level, that 90, 92 saturation, child is coughing, breathing pattern is different, child looks very dull. These things are to be taken to the hospital rather than self-managed. Thank you.
Thank you, doctor. So my next question is to Dr. Vimala. What are some of the post-COVID complications? Doctor, you need to unmute.
I don't have much experience in these patients, but what I do know or what I've heard of is most of the common like post-COVID symptoms that people do face is myalgia. They do feel a little bit weak even after they've recovered from their COVID symptoms. Some of them still have a increase in their respiratory rate, like their breathing is still not come back to normal. So they need to take a rest for a few more days. And the most severe complications, what we are talking about, are long-term complications because of some thrombosis that happens, which can be to a single limb, or it can be to both like upper or lower limbs, like hands or legs. Because we have seen some patients who come back to us with some swelling of their upper hand and I mean the upper limb, and they have no sensation. So those are some of the complications. And the most severe complication is when it affects the lungs. The lungs undergo fibrosis and is not able to expand or take up enough oxygen. So those are the most severe complications that we come across as post-COVID complications. And I think that sometimes, even if you feel that, or they say that you have recovered from COVID, some people have had a sort of a recurrence and had needed hospitalization even after being discharged from the hospital. Yes, Tej. I'll just find out if anybody else can add on to it. Anybody else, like an intensivist or somebody who has experience in treating.
Can I say something? Yeah, thank
yes.
you. Hey, apart from what you mentioned, like in pediatric, like couple of cases, children's I've seen in ICU where they don't present, a few of them, along with not purely from COVID, but COVID-related fever associated febrile seizures. And other thing is loose stool, diarrhea causing hypovolemic shock. And few of them may, if they are sensitive, for example, a child with underlying cardiac disease, as like what Dr. Shweta Madam was also asking, like congenital comorbidities, or on any immunosuppressant, a children who's already child is on nephrotic syndrome on steroids. These are the category of children who are already having some medical issues. A couple of children whom I've seen in ICU, they end up in ICU just because they already have a medical comorbidities. Otherwise, child who is completely hale and healthy from the community into ICU was very rare, except a couple of them, they presented 5 days after COVID infection with breathing difficulty, and they developed coronary artery dilatation. That is one complication which I've seen in terms of ICU. Apart from that, most of the children do good without any much problems.
Thank you, Dr.
Thank you.
Anybody else would like to contribute? Any other person has got some experience regarding this? It would be better if they talk.
Ma'am, I like to add here. I think all of us know one of the complications is loss of smell and taste. For most of the people, the smell and taste comes back within 2 weeks post-recovery. But there are those where the complication persists even for like more than 6 to 8 months. So there was a paper publication in 2019, which is which is the olfactory training method. So in case any one of you all, any parents who are undergoing this symptom post-recovery, you all can try this out. It's called the olfactory training method, which involves just basic smells taken in the form of essential oils. You can use lemon, eucalyptus, rose, and cloves. These can be taken in small containers, in glass containers, and you smell it at least for 15 to 20 seconds in a day, 2 times a day, at least for 6 to 12 weeks, or till you start getting your smell back. So this study shows that what we basically doing here is to re-establish the connection between your nose, that is your olfactory senses, from your nose to the brain. So you're trying to re-establish the connection. So many people have got benefited out of this. So once you start having the symptom of loss of smell and taste, you can start doing this olfactory training method and you may be benefited. And because there's no harm in this, you can very well go ahead and try with it. Thanks.
Thank you, Dr. Pratibha. Back to you, Tejo.
Thank you, doctors. So I would also like to ask a question regarding another post-COVID complications. I hear a lot that many people who are down with COVID get heart attacks and strokes. And is that a setback of negligence of COVID? That is, after we get it, not taking care of ourselves properly.
Question is open to whoever wants to take it.
Can I answer? No? Actually, what Tejas has told, it is not due to, it's due to the cytokine storms and due to the blood clotting mechanism. And it's not due to any other negligence or something like that. When the blood clotting mechanism is impaired, then they will produce stroke, heart attack, and every complications like that. It is pertaining to the vascular system. And one more complication is due to the cytokine storm, which affects the lungs. And consolidation will occur. So 2 complications which has to be taken care of. And in that stage, there are 2 stages of disease as well. First stage is viremia. Viremia is increased production of virus. In that stage, we can use drugs like remdesivir and antiviral drugs, and everything will be working. Afterwards, when the cytokine storms is taken and it is progressing, in that stage, the remdesivir has got very little effect. In that stage, only 2 drugs which is life-saving. One is low molecular weight heparin, and the next one is steroids. And steroids should be given at least for 3 weeks. They say 1 to 3 weeks. And heparin should be continued for 3 months. 6 to 8 weeks. In that stage, if that is not followed, the vascular complications like the stroke or the regularize. Am I clear? Any doubts?
No doubt, sir. Thank you.
Doctor, yeah, you did mention in few medical terms, which I'm not sure how many of our parents would understand. So does it mean a blood thinner would help?
Yes. Low molecular weight heparin is a blood thinner.
So yeah, our parents watching would not know the medical terms of what goes behind it. So what are the blood thinners, and how do you think they should take? Should they go to a general physician and tell them that I'm a patient who's during post-COVID, I've just recovered, should I take a blood thinner? So what should the plan be? Or anyone 30 and above can take a blood thinner for the next 3 months? Should they go by a prescription?
No. Actually, that will be taken care in the
The problem now is not many of them go to hospitals. They home quarantine themselves, they go take a test, and once they show as negative, they again go back to normalcy. And when it hits them hard, and it costs them their life. So that is what even I've seen with people between 35 to 55, where a lot of them have, suffered strokes and heart attacks. and we call it a negligence because there was nobody to advise them. They didn't know that a blood thinner is mandatory.
Yeah. But we cannot use in the house and the home content, we cannot use the blood thinner. It's highly dangerous because if you use blood thinner, it might produce subarachnoid hemorrhages and everything can be arising from that. Blood will be due to the hemorrhagic effect, it will cause stroke, everything like that. So we cannot use that in the home quarantine.
Ma'am, I think basically, like in case you have a mild form of COVID, then you don't need to be on this post-COVID medications. That's what you're trying to say. If the patient has a severe or moderate form of COVID, then he will be advised, or he or she will be advised by the doctor to follow up with blood thinners and other medications of post-COVID medications.
Yes, ma'am.
Shweta, ma'am?
Just to add to the discussion, basically, there is no one answer for it. Number one, it depends on who is the patient, what is the age of the patient, is the patient having any medical comorbidities already, any high risk of cardiac events possible for the patient because of BMI, obesity nature, or patient is on any stress, cardiac, or based on the patient's triglyceride or the cholesterol level, what the patient has got. All this put together, along with, as what ma'am is mentioning right now, about the severity of the COVID infection, what the patient is going through currently. All this put together will make the doctor decide whether the patient needs an anticoagulant or what the blood thinner, what you're discussing is about. So to be precise, if a person is more than 45 to 50 plus, obese, high risk, and the severity of CT chest done is moderate grade, they'll be put on prophylactic anticoagulants or blood thinners, which will be started with, as doctor was mentioning, low molecular weight heparin, which is a blood thinner that is put on subcutaneous injection format, which will be given for 5 days and converted into oral blood thinners, which will be continued up to 6 weeks duration. That is a recommendation. It will be decided based on the condition and the severity. And at home quarantine, no one is started on blood thinners until unless they are being seen by a doctor and prescribed oral anticoagulants if they are fit for it. Suppose if not done in a right way, the patient may get complications of bleeding and other high risk life-threatening issues of blood thinners. So definitely I would recommend, one, if a person is more than 45-50 plus who is requiring hospitalization or who is worried about taking a blood thinner, should visit a hospital, check, do a CT scan, do inflammatory markers. That is, they do, apart from the basic blood test, they do check with the blood to see what is the level of infection or the inflammatory, as like everyone is discussing about the cytokine storm. Basically, they look at this D-dimer value, LDH, ferritin, interleukin, CRP, all these parameters put together along with the CT chest, they will decide, yes, the severity of the inflammatory markers are high with CT scoring of that much, which will warrant us to start the patient on a blood thinner along with a steroid based on the situation. If patient is fine, inflammatory markers are in the normal range, CT scoring is mild, and the patient does not have any severity or comorbid conditions, they'll be just advised to do home quarantine with supportive care and hydration, which is good enough. Hope I answered. Please ask if there is any questions, ma'am. I'll also be happy to know more.
I think that it's been quite clear. And parents who are watching us live, you could type your questions on inbox for us to get back to you if you have any doubts and queries. Back to you, Teju.
So I would like to ask a question to Dr. Ramani. So when do you think this whole situation would get back to normalcy, and when can I start going back to school?
I think that's a question which even I would like to ask. When do you think we can have our children back with us?
Even I would like to go. See, it's very difficult to say. This pandemic, it tends to occur in waves. Each wave, there are a lot of people will get sick and they will recover eventually. At one final day, the disease will go. Disease will die, or it occurs as an endemic. Probably down the line, another 2-3 years.
Because wait that long, doctor?
Yeah, of course, man. But hopefully the next waves become less severe.
They say the third phase is it's going to be, the impact is going to be more on children.
Yes, certainly, man. The third, see, it's not a third wave definitely is going to come, but it's very predicting when it is going to come. It's very difficult, man. And it won't be exclusively or it won't severely affect the children. That's for sure.
The concern that I see is when we are on a lockdown, we have our children and parents being locked up inside the house, and the immunity levels become low, right? And when things go back to normalcy, even though the pandemic is not over, it's not complete, we do see parents opening out the children, and children are all over the malls and playgrounds and everywhere, though they need to be. But is it safe? Because I feel when they are in a closed environment or closed, closed back at home, their levels of their, they are quite open to nature when they're prone to picking up an infection when they're left open after that.
Definitely,
since the immunity levels are low.
Yeah, even this wave goes also, we have to follow the COVID appropriate behavior for the next few years. Or going to the, when the lockdown opened up, when we are going to malls and everywhere, it's going to invite more infection. Let's see what happened this wave. People are roaming here and there, roaming all around. Then the second wave became very severe. If we followed the COVID appropriate behavior, it won't be that much severe.
So so we are on the page that we still contract COVID only through our eyes and nose and our mouth.
Yeah.
Is that proven? Because we do hear parents coming back and saying, for the last 6 months, me and my child have not stepped out of the house. We have not got anyone coming into our house. We have just got our provisions being dropped at the doorstep. I don't know how the entire family is down with COVID.
Some loophole will be there, man. The maids used to come to the home, or people will go, or the father might go out and he contract the disease. Without contact, the COVID just won't enter into your doorstep.
And a question for anyone who would want to take. As an educationist, seeing children coming to us as young as 1.5 to 2, we see the normalcy is totally distorted. We see a setback in the physical development. We see a change in the emotional and the mental well-being of children. We see a total difference in even the posture of children, the way they walk, to the way they sit. They are not the way they used to be when they were coming to us back a year before. So when we can see visible dents and things as setbacks on the children, a lot of invisible things are left inside where you really don't know what is working inside a child. It can be a loss of, it could be a psychological issue. It could be a dent in the future perspective. Like we had a talk where we had a Harvard paper that was presented, which said a child who doesn't go to school for the first 5 years, they do face challenges after they become a teen and when they start taking up a responsibility of a family. Where are we now? I mean, we have totally taken away the normalcy in a child. What is future for these children? I would want 3 of you. I want someone to talk about 0 to 5. I want someone to talk about 5 to 12, getting into a teenager. And I want someone to talk about teenager to adolescence. Because when we deal with children of different, development stages, each development stage has something that, different from the other. Teenagers and adolescents, yes, they do have a psychological issue where they've totally been curbed off the social interaction with their peer group and even mingling and the sport. 0 to 5 development stages. So I open the question to you. So anyone who volunteers to take up 0 to 5, 5 to 12, 12 to 17, the teenagers and adolescents.
So as we were speaking, before the session went live, so there's this huge data that's coming up on predictability of what these children's futures are going to be in terms of their emotional well-being, development, and this huge discrepancy that we might be facing when the children between 0 to 5 will be at the ages where they should be performing in their 20s. So the early primitive age is considered to be very, very important to play a major role, especially in medical terms. If you talk about the the brain growth. You know, the brain has sulci and gyri. Brain has a structure where, you know, it goes down and up. This we call it sulci and gyri. So the more the stimulation, the better the neuronal development is. So having said this, the study is actually predicting that these children, because they don't have the advantage of the early development, the prime years of 0 to 5 years, where the brain growth is actually going to be about 90-95%. You know, there's a rapid growth, wherein the neuron connections are developing, and it's very important at this age to be stimulated at various levels. So it's actually trying to predict that if their performance will be affected. So what is that we can do right now, considering the thing? I consider that we're one of the luckiest persons where we could get our children do the Regio work. So that is something that I was consider myself to be really blessed with. My child being the 3-year mark when we started, and I know it's very important. The amount of effort that is put in to stimulate the various aspects by these activities is really helpful. So having said this, for children between 0 to 5 years, predominantly how we can cut down the gadgets and stimulate them with these activities in person can help. So I know there was a lot of debate going before the second wave on how ethical it is to get them going onto screen. But with this situation and considering them growing up to another decade or two, this is the best that we're doing them in terms of their neuronal stimulation. So that is between 0 and 5 years. So if anyone else has to talk about.
Ma'am, instead of worrying what we are going to do in the future, currently the state is locked. We are going to get confined in the house and the kid is going to stay with us. So we can stimulate all this development of the senses in whatever the material is available in and around us. Like you told, there are lots and lots of things in the Regio kit, like which will stimulate both your proprioceptive and vestibular senses, like playing using the dowel and also skipping rope and all those painting, water play, sand play, all those are help stimulate their senses, which is going to help in their brain development and also deal with their emotional issues. So like adults, the kids are a bit different, right? When we are frustrated, we are depressed, we just call a friend and we talk, we let out their emotions. But this picture is completely different in the child. That's the reason the child becomes irritated, cranky, showing temper tantrums, all those things. So this form of therapy, like playing in the sand, playing in the water, painting, coloring, helps them to let out their negative energy and the emotions. So with these material available around us, we can make sure the kids involve more amount of time in this.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, ma'am. I would also like to know Dr. Lavanya's take on this topic.
Take up for 12 to 17 years, ma'am. This is the most crucial adolescent. No, they are terrible teens. In fact, this is the time, valuable time, which is essential for their both physical, mental, emotional well-being. All is being bone to bone. I think instead of predicting what is going to be after 6 months or 8 months, we should plan up what is going to happen for them for another next 3 months. Because even May holidays also, they are they're not able to talk to their friends. No. When they talk, like we should restrict on, we have too much restrictions on social media, on screen time. Maybe we should set a routine for them, daily routine, no? Like what time they should get up, which is what was there during pre-pandemic era, at least something which can work out to the home schedule. Meaning what time their wake up time, sleep routines, play time, and parents, I think parents are their best friends now, no? Because they are not unable to meet their parents and unable to meet their friends, and they're unable to share their feelings with their teachers, friends. No, this is what this age children they require. So they're all lagging behind. At least let them, friends can have a chat at least in the system, no? Through mobile calls, maybe half an hour per day or 20 minutes to their close friend, let them talk, and encouraging some physical activities, a morning walk, at least with a mask, with all COVID appropriate behaviors, hand washing, mask and social distancing, all this. And I think parents watching a movie with them, what are they liking? So parents should adjust with them with some of their likings and go ahead at least half an hour per day, maybe what channels they want or what they want to see in their social media with our guidance. I think something like this to to at least to pull up them till another for next 3 months. Then we have to predict what is going to happen next.
Thank you, Doctor. Eju? Dr. Ramani, would you like to pitch in for ages of 5 to 12? And I'm sure you're a father and you have 2 children between the ages of 5 to 12.
Can I add one more point, madam?
Yeah, please go ahead, Doctor. Doctor, please go ahead. I think Dr. Mohan's bandwidth is less. Okay, Dr. Ramani, would you like to pitch in for? Okay, so I think they are busy. So what is your take next on the sports children? We have had cognitively active children who are missing out a lot, and the cognition is put to rest, I would say, because in case they're not kept themselves busy at home, and that leads to boredom, and they get into gadget time if they're not been monitored. Sports children who have been who have been working out for like 4 and 5 hours a day on competitive sports. One is they do have a setback in terms of the physical exertion and the outputs and the burnout that they have. And there's nothing challenging for sports children because it becomes a very monotonous and a very stalemate situation back home. How do we even keep these children engaged? So we only come to it when there is a problem that he's gone on a wrong route. He's been surfing. But we need to go back and ponder and ask ourselves a question: why has the child gone there? Right? He or she might take to gadgets, might take to watching TV channels or YouTube channels. Why? Because he's not been challenged enough. I'm sure parents have their own bit of uncertainties back home and the work pressure back home. But how are we to deal with these children? Any takers for this? Okay, let's watch, let's wait and watch, and let's hope and pray that if not for anything, for the benefit of all the younger generation and the children, things go back to normalcy. The COVID leaves at least or spares the children alone. Last year, same time, I think we were sitting back home during a lockdown, watching TV on how the country where the COVID had actually started off, the setback that the country had, not realizing a year later in the city of Coimbatore, we are in a similar situation, which we never dreamt of. Coimbatore being one of the safest places, I would say, in Tamil Nadu or in the whole of India, is at red alert right now. And the challenge is being faced by the medical community, though they're doing a fantastic job in terms of the hospitals and the medical staff that go in there, the healthcare workers. We are still at crossroads in terms of education, in terms of a children's well-being, and in terms of a parent well-being, not knowing where we are stepping foot into the next day and what uncertainties we have to live with. So thank you, parents, and thank you for taking your time off your busy schedule, and I'm sure the doctors. Yeah, doctor.
Actually, I want to say one more thing. Since the screen time is higher, I will recommend one UV filter glass will be very effective for the students or children like that, which will prevent our eyes from damage.
Actually, we have been planning to getting one of that along with our books and our radio kit for the children. Yeah, so thank you for your suggestion.
Thank you.
We didn't foresee that we would go back to another couple of months of online classes and virtual classes. We did see a ray of hope coming in the month of March and April until things got back to where we are right now. Let's hope and pray things change for the betterment of the world, for the betterment of our children, and to give back the normalcy which they most deserve. Yes, so thank you, doctors. Thank you for taking your time off and for making it available for our parent community. And take care, stay strong. We need you around. Bye-bye.